Corbyn to move the motion.
Thank you, Dr. Huxley. It's a pleasure to start this debate with you in the chair. Do you want me to pause while colleagues move in and out?
Officially, we're 19 minutes, 19 seconds over. I think Jeremy Corbyn, carry on. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. Pleased to be able to introduce this debate on the situation of security in its widest sense in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I'm very grateful to many groups and people that have sent me information and advice ahead of this particular debate. And I'm delighted to see the Minister in her place, and I congratulate her on her appointment and look forward to her reply. I'm not totally aware of how many colleagues wish to speak, but I'll try and make sure my speech is sufficiently short that everyone is able to get in.
I think there's a fair amount of time. We have two backbenchers and then the front benchers.
Okay. First of all, the DRC is the largest country in Africa, but with certainly the very largest amount of unexploited mineral resources of any country in Africa. And it ought to be a place that the sale of mineral wealth could have made it an incredibly wealthy place by now. It is not. It is desperately poor and a desperately divided country. It's been my pleasure to visit the DRC on two occasions, once as an election observer in 2006, I think it was, and on another occasion on a human rights delegation to Goma and the east of the country, where I met many women who were victims of rape being used as a weapon of war. The history of the Congo is long, brutal, sad, and complicated. It wasn't taken as a European colony until the mid-part of the 19th century, when Belgium took over in 1885, or rather King Leopold took over in 1885, as a result of the Congress of Berlin, which divided up Africa in the interests of European powers. The Congolese people were not represented in any way at that. They were merely chattels to be fought over by the rival European powers. Leopold ran the country as his own personal fiefdom for the next 20 years in the most brutal manner possible, and there was most appalling abuses of human rights with enforced rubber collectors and enforced miners, and as well as the continuation of the slave trade, which had gone on for certainly the previous 2 centuries before that. The atrocities were recognized globally eventually, partly through the work of a British diplomat, Sir Roger Casement, who was later executed for his part in the Easter Rising in Ireland, and J.D. Morrell, who was a shipping clerk in Liverpool, who observed what was going on through his company, Elder Dempster, and eventually became a Labour MP and a minister in 1923 in that Labour government. Before that, the global objections to Leopold's excesses were such that the Belgian Parliament effectively nationalised the Congo and took it for itself, and it was then run as a Belgian colony until independence in 1961. During that time, Belgian mining companies made an enormous amount of money out of the Congo, invested not very much in the infrastructure of the Congo other than railways to take the minerals to the sea and shipping lines to take other minerals down and timber and other products down the rivers. It was very much an exploitative and extractive economy. On independence in 1961, Patrice Lumumba became the Prime Minister and made a very strong declaration on independence at the time and also at the United Nations, and was assassinated a few months later. And the country then deteriorated into a degree of war with the big powers, the Soviet Union and the United States, both being involved in it. It almost became a Cold War by proxy there. So the background was something that was pretty bad all round. There isn't time to go into all of the history of the Congo, but I want to just sort of set that as the scene of the background and all the other governments that have gone on since 1961, Mobutu and others, and the huge degrees of corruption that went with it. And at all the time, the continuing poverty of many of the Congolese people. And so we're now faced with a situation in the country where there is devastating levels of insecurity. 6 million people have been killed in conflict since 1996 in the Congo. Just think of that figure again, 6 million have died since 1996. It's barely mentioned in most of the world's media. You have to dig hard to find any reference to the Congo in most of the world's media. Issues of illegal mining continue, and mass displacement. Over 7 million people have been displaced in the eastern region alone, and there are endemic diseases such as now Mpox, malaria, TB and cholera, and the limited hospitals and health service are overwhelmed. There is food insecurity, malnutrition and gender-based violence, and lack of access to clean water and necessities, and very large numbers of refugees either internally displaced or in Angola or other neighbouring countries. And so we're looking at a really very, very serious situation. There are more than 100 armed groups fighting for control of natural resources in the eastern region, most notably the M23, Mouvement du Devantoire de Mar, who are financially backed and have received training from Rwanda and other governments. And more than a third of the children of the Congo have no school to go to. And so the background is something that is, I wanted just to summarize before I go into more detail. And in Adam Hochschild's brilliant book, King Leopold's Ghost, and I take a quote from it, he said, "On the whole continent, perhaps no nation has had a harder time than the Congo in emerging from the shadow of its past." He wrote that some time ago, but it still applies today. And so we have issues to deal with of the conflict, which has got worse and heightened during the Rwanda genocide of 1994. Basically, the DRC is both blessed and cursed with abundance of natural resources. These include cobalt, coltan, diamonds, copper, tin and gold, as well as the other more obvious natural resource of vast timber resources of one of the world's largest and most pristine rainforests. Indeed, I've taken a flight once from Goma to Kinshasa, and you're just flying for seemingly hours just over forest. It's incredibly beautiful, pristine and beautiful, but then you look underneath it and you see the levels of poverty and malnutrition. I think the opposition spokesperson has also taken probably the same journey as I have and probably had the same experiences. And so these minerals that are taken from the Congo is the main factor in all of the conflict at the present time. Congo has 70% of the world's cobalt reserves. Cobalt is essential to almost every lithium-ion rechargeable battery, such as those used in phones and laptops, as well as innovations like solar power that we see as necessary to deal with climate change. And so our batteries, our mobile phones, and so much else are actually run by minerals that come from the Congo. In fact, much of the Western economy simply couldn't work without the minerals that the Congo is forced to exploit, or export rather. And the armed rebel groups that terrorize much of the country are actually usually involved in mineral trade in some way or the other. And so it's these issues that we do have to face up to. Only 2 days ago, for example, the Congolese government buried 200 internally displaced people who had died in various camps around Goma in North Kivu. And they died from different circumstances, usually hunger and diseases, sometimes violence. And there's been heavy fighting between the Congolese army and the armed groups. And the World Health Organization has now declared Mpox an epidemic in Africa. A brief ceasefire in the summer was extended until August. There are, however, allegations of violations in the situation in northern Kivu remains very volatile indeed. And so the issue of the continuation of a ceasefire agreement that was signed in Luanda under Angola's auspices between the DRC and Rwanda are significant, and I hope the Minister will be able to shed some light on the possibility of that ceasefire being made permanent, and at least the establishment of an accountable force that can control the situation rather than the dangerous situation that we have at the present time. That resolution also authorised MONUSCO, the United Nations operation there, to continue operating in the eastern DRC, where it has been for quite a long time. Although the UN missions in the Congo do have a rather checkered history and checkered past and are not universally popular in the Congo, but nevertheless most people recognise that without a UN mission there, life would be even worse than it is at the present time. This is the country which has suffered the worst amount of sexual violence in war of almost any country in the world. And that is a terrible thing to have to say. And the numbers of victims of sexual violence are absolutely huge. And I've never forgotten personally arriving in Goma on this human rights visit I went to with one colleague from Parliament. We arrived in the evening. It was more or less dark when we got there. We went to a refugee centre which was entirely populated by women who were victims of rape. And they then said, "Thank you for coming. It's great you're here. You're welcome. And thank you for telling the world about the plight we're in. Can you now give a speech to us?" What on earth can a Western European man say to a meeting of 500,000 women, all of whom were victims of rape, many of whom were made pregnant because of the rape they'd suffered? What can you say to them other than you want to just give them all the support and comfort that you can in order to try to understand the horror of their situation? It's a weapon of war that is being used there. And the health concerns that I outlined a few moments ago are serious and getting worse. And of course, health concerns, as Ebola has shown, as Mpox has shown, as COVID has shown, and others, are impossible to isolate. If one part of the world suffers from a serious contagious disease, then the levels of transport and communication that we now have, every part of the world is at risk as a result of that. It's in everybody's interests to provide health care and health support to the people of the Congo to get through the epidemics they're facing at the present time. An act of charity may be, an act of necessity, absolutely, it certainly is. Also, to look to the future and education in the Congo, which is, for most children, non-existent. For those that can get to school, the schools are very limited, and over many years the teachers are paid sometimes, sometimes not. Most of the education is done via the church, but there are many who are simply not receiving any education at all. This, again, in the country with these vast mineral resources through which vast profits are being made all around the world. Those children not getting an education, and too many become involved in the next thing I want to talk about, which is illegal mining and the exporting of the product of illegal mining. And this is done by the convenient method of illicit and illegal mining that goes on in the Congo. Then miraculously, the products of it appear in another country, such as Rwanda or somewhere else, are then bought by global mining corporations like Glencore or others, and then appear on the world market and end up in our mobile phones and in our batteries. Children as young as 5 are often forced to work in brutal conditions. And a very good book written by Siddharth Kara entitled Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. He describes, as of 2022, there is no such thing as a clean supply chain of cobalt from the Congo. All cobalt sourced from the DRC is tainted by various degrees of abuse, including slavery, child labour, forced labour, debt bondage, human trafficking, hazardous and toxic working conditions, pathetic wages, injury and death, and incalculable environmental harm. I'd advise anyone who wants to be interested in the Congo to read at least 2 of the books that I've mentioned. That is Hochschild's book on King Leopold's gold and Kara's book on cobalt. Al Jazeera recently published an article, Blood and Minerals, Who Profits from the Conflict in the Congo? And they managed to speak to miners, a trafficker, an undertaker, and a prostitute to understand the way of life in the mineral region. And I'll read this bit. A miner called Innocent was a 16-year-old who walked an hour to the largest coltan mine post in the country. As he was guiding the journalists to the mine post, they encountered several men carrying the body of a miner on a makeshift stretcher. Innocent told journalists, sometimes the mountain caves in and miners are buried forever and people forgot about them. The trafficker then went on to explain that many miners work for 14 hours a day and only get paid about $1. The trafficker collects his merchandise from the miners by the river and goes on to sell the goods, earning around $2,000 a month. Traffickers who buy already screened minerals at the foot of the mine then end up multiplying it when they leave to the border of Rwanda and Uganda. By the time the coltan arrives in the manufacturing districts, like in Shanghai, Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, or other places around the world, the market price is between $470 and $540 per kilo. So you look at the multiplier of effect of a child getting almost nothing to mine these vital products, and then they end up on the world market where they sell for enormous amounts of money. So the mining companies such as Glencore, which is based in Switzerland, have exploited the conflict for their own benefit. And they were recently found guilty under Swiss law for inadequate organisation that led to corrupt mining deals. This included the bribing of officials. Public Eye filed a criminal complaint with the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland following the publication of the Paradise Papers, which shed new light on the purchase of cobalt and copper mines in the DRC. Glencore commissioned the services of a businessman, Dan Gertler, who is on the US sanctions list, to secure favourable mining deals. He brought about a staggering price reduction on behalf of Glencore in 2008 during negotiations with Kabila's government about the Katanga Mining Company, and in 2011 acquired shares of the Mutanda and Kusaki and Kansuki mines from the Congolese State Mining Company at far below their market value. 4 years of investigation by the OAG found that around $26 million had been paid from Swiss bank accounts to a close associate of the then president of the DRC. Glencore ultimately benefited financially from the deals, as OAG's judgment states. Glencore had been ordered to pay $150 million, which is nothing in comparison to the loss that the Congolese people have suffered. And so I think there needs to be some much sterner action taken by all governments and globally concerning this horrifying supply chain of vital minerals which are mined at the expense of the living conditions and the poverty of many people in the Congo, and could provide so much in the way of education and so much more for other people in the Congo. And so the purpose of my debate today is to try and draw attention to the history of the Congo, to draw attention to the plight that many people are suffering at the present time, but also to try and hear what the new UK government's view is on this and how we can take it forward. Because the UN is involved and endorsed by Security Council 217 in 2023, and experts are concerned that if MONUSCO withdraws, key components of early warning systems of human rights violations will no longer be operational, significantly limiting human rights monitoring, reporting, and investigation. And the UN has apparently asked the Congolese government to ensure the consolidation of the handover of security responsibilities in South Kivu. And I hope those assurances are forthcoming. But with lack of support and logistical support, military support for troops and groups to defeat the M23 is hampering efforts. So we have huge investment in groups in order to make other people very, very wealthy indeed. And also it calls into question the role of the Rwandan government in this, in facilitating M23 activities, and what action is going to be taken. And I just conclude with one point and a couple of questions. The point is the UK ambassador to the Congo, James Karuki, said in a statement to the UN Security Council only a few months ago in April, we also emphasize our commitment to a gradual, responsible and sustainable withdrawal. We call on the DRC government, through close coordination with MONUSCO, to assume its protection responsibilities for the civilian people in line with the joint disengagement plan. Can the government elaborate on how this will be emphasized in its commitment to sustainable withdrawal? And whilst we have continued to advance UN-sanctioned M23, condemned the continued advance of UN-sanctioned M23 forces, external actors need to withdraw as well because they are part of the problem. So my question is, yes, of course.
Thank you. The Honourable Gentleman has mentioned the disruptive effects and consequences of commercial organisations such as Glencore, and I think you can trace that through other commercial interests in France, Romania, Bulgaria, and indeed elsewhere. I wonder if you would also acknowledge the disruptive implications of some of those other external military forces, such as the Wagner Group, who I recently encountered in North Sudan, who are prevalent also in Congo, and who were once a proxy organisation of the Russian state, but who are now, of course, much more closely involved. Thank you.
I thank the member for the intervention. It's the bedevilment of the Congo that so many proxy groups turn up there in order to benefit, essentially, mineral exploitation. Yes. And it's the people of the Congo that suffer. From wherever they come from, they are wrong. From wherever they come from, they should not be there. They should go. And I'm absolutely clear about that. So I'd like to ask a question of the government, what relationship it has with the Rwandan government and what pressure it's putting on them, if it's able to increase humanitarian aid to the DRC, particularly in relation to education of both girls and boys. I know that there was a priority given to girls' education by the Department of Overseas Development, which is now part of the Foreign Office. I support that, but I also made the point that if you want the next generation of boys growing up not to commit the appalling sexual violence of their parents' generation and previous male generations, then they need education as well. It's not just girls that need to be educated, it's boys that need to be educated also. And what support are we able to give to MONUSCO in important work that it does there? So, Dr. Hook, I'd like to just finish now by saying the legacy of injustice can only be erased through the pursuit of truth and reconciliation, which was again a quote from Adam Hochschild. And Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has said this insecurity is being fueled by a seemingly impassable mountain of challenges, from large-scale corruption to the unbridled race between multiple parties to take control and exploit the country's wealth of natural resources to ongoing violent land disputes. I want to finish at this point because I think I've taken up too much time, but I hope I've managed to set out what my concerns are about the DRC.
It's not a question of time. Within his rights, but we do have a vote, at least one. Does anyone know how many of these there are now? No idea. No whip on that in the House. 2, we think. It is 15 minutes. It's a suspension now of 15 minutes for the first and 10 minutes for every subsequent vote. So what's it now? 53 plus 15 is
8 minutes past.
8 minutes past if there's one, if not 18 minutes past. Yep. 18 minutes past in here, unless there's only one, then at 8 minutes. So we're pressing the pause button now. And I can answer his question directly to him. Yeah. question is that this House has considered security in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kate Osamor.
Thank you, Dr. Huck, for calling me to speak. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I also want to thank the Right Honourable Member for Islington North for securing this important debate. Today I stand to discuss a crisis that has persisted for decades. A crisis that has devastated lives, many of which are my constituents, destroyed communities and destabilised an entire region. I'm speaking, of course, about the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. A nation of immense potential, endowed with vast natural resources. The DRC is blessed with abundant natural resources, including gold, diamonds, tin, tantalum and cobalt resources that are essential to the global economy. Instead of being a blessing, these resources have fueled conflict. Armed groups, both domestic and foreign, have fought to control these resources, using the profits from illegal mining and trade to finance their operations and to perpetuate violence. The DRC has been described as a paradox, a country so rich in resources yet so poor in terms of development and human security. For over 2 decades, the people of the DRC have faced unspeakable horrors, from the wars of the late 1990s and the early 2000s, which drew in multiple neighbouring countries and claimed millions of lives, to the ongoing conflicts that continue to plague the eastern regions of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. The Congolese state has often been unable or unwilling to protect its citizens, maintain security, or provide basic services, leaving communities vulnerable to violence, denying its people peace, stability, and prosperity. We must confront the humanitarian consequences of this conflict. The human cost is staggering. Over 6 million people have died because of the conflict-related causes since the late 1990s. Millions more have been displaced from their homes, with over 7.3 million people currently internally displaced. The violence has led to one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world today. The conflict has also been marked by horrific human rights abuses. Women and children have borne the brunt of this violence, with systematic sexual violence used as a weapon of war. Entire communities have been traumatised, and the psychological scars will take generations to heal. The violence has disrupted access to education, healthcare and basic services, deepening poverty and perpetuating cycles of suffering. The international community must play a pivotal role in addressing the conflict in the DRC. MONUSCO has been present in the country for over 2 decades, working to protect civilians and support peace efforts. However, the challenges are immense, and peace remains elusive. We must rethink our approach to peace building in the DRC, because any solution to the conflict in the DRC must be inclusive and address the root causes of violence. This means bringing all stakeholders to the table: national and local leaders, civil society, women's groups, youth and marginalised communities. Peace cannot be achieved through top-down agreements alone. It must be built from the ground up. As I draw my remarks to a close, I would like to ask the Minister, when winding up, to address the following 4 points. What is the UK government doing to address economic drivers of conflict and the illegal exploitation of natural resources in regards to attributing as a major driver of the conflict? How is the UK government strengthening state institutions and governance? Peace in the DRC requires a strong and accountable government that can provide security, deliver services, and uphold the rule of law. What talks has the UK government undertaken to enhance regional cooperation and stability? The conflict in the DRC is deeply intertwined with regional dynamics. Lastly, what is the UK government doing to protect human rights and ensuring accountability? Impunity is a major obstacle to peace. We must support efforts to hold perpetrators of violence accountable, whether they are members of armed groups, government forces, or foreign actors. In conclusion, the conflict in the DRC is one of the most challenging crises of our time, but it's not a hopeless one. The Congolese people have shown remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. Their desire for peace, stability, and a chance to build a better future for themselves and their children. It is our collective responsibility, whether that is Congolese leaders, regional partners, and the international community, to stand with them in their quest for peace. Let us be bold, united in our purpose, and unwavering in our commitment to ending the conflict in the DRC. Together, we can help the DRC move from a cycle of violence to a cycle of peace, development, and prosperity. Thank you.
Again, for the third time this afternoon, a pleasure to serve under your chairship and a real pleasure to be here as well. Can I commend genuinely the Right Honourable Member for Islington North for leading the day's debate. His insight, knowledge, direction and contribution in the Chamber today, I think, is exceptional. I say that with all honesty and not and with a graciousness. I mean that to be the case. I know the Right Honourable Gentleman and I myself have many things that we don't agree on. Seeing this thing, we're on the same page, Madam Chair, and I want to put that on record. Also, a real pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady and to hear her contribution as well, and thank her for that. The discussion about the security situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is of great significance. And when I listened to the introduction, my goodness, I realised not everybody will know about the minerals and how important they are for countries across the world, but they are. And the significance from a financial, from a world stability point of view are really quite incredible when you have more insight and understand it better. The importance of addressing this crisis cannot be ignored, but from both a humanitarian standpoint and in terms of regional stability. So it is indeed good to be here to discuss what more we can do to offer support. My interest, Madam Chair, will always be more to do with the human rights issues, because that's a subject matter that I'm particularly interested in, and I want to put that in record. I also have a deep interest, Madam Chair, as you will know, and indeed others in this chamber will know, I'm chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religious Belief. And I, as a Christian, we speak up for those with Christian beliefs, those with other beliefs and those with no beliefs, because that's what I believe is the right thing to do, and that drives me in my contributions. So I eagerly anticipated the contribution from the Minister, who is always insightful, an esteemed colleague here and one that is respected by many, who I know shares our concerns about this matter. I also look very much forward to hearing the Shadow Minister's contribution, because for a long time I know that the Shadow Minister has deep interest in this particular region, and her contribution, I know, will be of equal importance, if I can say that with no disrespect to anybody else, and I look forward to what you have to say. The humanitarian crisis in the DRC is staggering. Over 7 million people have been displaced within the country. More than 13 million require urgent humanitarian assistance. And this includes millions of children at risk of starvation. In the eastern Congo, some 500,000 people had to flee their homes. It's the highest number of internally displaced people in all of Africa. You have to remember, I mean that to us all, not when I say you have to remember, I have to remember as well that what that means in geographically. Some 98 million people live in the DRC, and it's got the highest displaced number. Gives you an idea of what those numbers are. And just recently, in August the 30th, terrorists shot and killed some 57 people in Goma. The Right Honourable Gentleman referred to Goma and some of the things that have happened over the last period of time, and indeed it is very, very difficult to listen to it. From the APPG point of view, it is said that from the research, Madam Chair, that some 95% of the DRC population are Christian, some 1.5% are Muslim, and some 1.8% have no religious affiliation at all. The churches that are combined to make up that 95% are the for evangelical Christians, Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, There's also other churches, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Greek and the independent Orthodox churches. The reason why I give those figures, because these terrorist attacks and the human rights abuses, the catalogue of sexual abuse that the Right Honourable Gentleman referred to, I find those things very, very hard, Madam Chair, to contemplate. I find them incredibly hard even to think about, to tell you the truth. And I know the Right Honourable Member in his introduction was finding it hard to contemplate and understand what it is as well. Although his illustration of going to that camp, my goodness, would you speak? I would have had no idea what I could have said that would be of any comfort. I would just feel inadequate. And I know how he felt, because I would have felt exactly the same. The reason why I make the figures is because 38% of the persecution, of the human rights abuses, of the rapes and sexual abuse, the killings, the lootings, the desecration of churches are carried out upon 38% of the Christian population, which gives you an idea of a population of 98 million. And 38%, say 40% of that, gives you an idea of how many Christians are persecuted during this conflict. And that tells me, Madam Chair, that this conflict is one of the worst terrorist conflicts that I can ever imagine across all of Africa. And I say that to have it on record. And given the escalating violence in the region and the growing displacement of civilians, the support of the United Kingdom, of our government here, and the broader international community is more crucial than ever. The DRC has long been troubled by armed conflicts, yet it also holds tremendous potential due to its rich natural resources and strategic importance. However, these resources have often been a curse rather than a blessing. I think that was the words that the Right Honourable Member used at the beginning. I just stood it in my mind because I put down the same thing in my mind as well. They fuel corruption, they fuel violence, exploitation, rather than development and prosperity, as they should. And we take all those people out of that poverty and bring them into a standard of living which would be right. I spoke about the sexual attacks on women and girls. It doesn't matter for some of those monsters, those vile people who carry these out, what the age of the person may be, young or old, or anything in between. We have to address those things. The international community, including the UK, must ask what actions have been taken to alleviate the suffering in the DRC. Have there been any diplomatic efforts to encourage a peaceful transition of power in accordance with the DRC's constitution? I ask these questions constructively to the Minister, by the way, and they're always meant to be that. What measures have been implemented to address the widespread human rights abuses, including the extrajudicial killings carried out by state agents? I understand to be as well. The DRC is not only a humanitarian disaster, but also a potential powder keg for the whole regional instability. Tens of thousands of refugees have already fled to neighbouring countries such as Uganda, Angola, Tanzania and Zambia, raising the risk of conflicts spilling over into these regions. The South African Development Society, our community, SADC, under South Africa's relationship, has a vital role to play in bringing about peace and stability in the DRC. So perhaps, Minister, I'm sorry that I'd rather give you notice of these questions because it gives you a chance to respond better. But there is a role for South Africa in all this, and I'd be very keen to hear how we can work with South Africa and others to bring it about. There's many church groups, and yeah, I'm going to come as quick as I'll probably talk at 100 miles an hour now. Can I ask the Minister this question as well, and I'll try to make this my last point. I have many churches in my constituency who are active in DRC and across Africa. I believe there's a role they can play for the NGOs and how they can do things better. So again, Minister, is that something that could be considered? UK's involvement in the DRC, whether through diplomatic efforts, humanitarian aid, or support for democratic process, is not just a matter of moral responsibility, but also of strategic importance. A stable DRC could contribute significantly to regional stability and development and benefit the broader African continent and the global community. In conclusion, what role can the UK play in supporting DRC's transition to a stable and prosperous nation? How can we ensure that the humanitarian aid reaches those most in need and that it supports not only immediate relief but also long-term development? There's also the pressing question of how we can support credible elections in the DRC. These are constructive questions which are essential for restoring democracy and preventing further violence. So I look very much forward to the Minister's answer, and I also look forward to the Shadow Minister and her contribution as well. Madam Chair, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Huck, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship. And I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Islington North for having applied for this debate and having secured it. And I think he came from exactly the right position at the outset, which is about seeing this context from the perspective of the most vulnerable people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've all had our own statistics for the horror of what's going on there. I read that in the year 2022, more than 38,000 attacks were reported in North Kivu province alone against women and girls. And most of the women and girls were reported attacked by armed men and displaced men in camps for IDPs. So it's really tragic what has been going on there. But the Honourable Member for Strangford has talked about British policy at the end there, and so we should think about UK policy and what difference the UK can make. In 2018, the then Conservative government said that more than 2 million people had been lifted out of poverty in the DRC since 2005, thanks to UK international development aid. I think that it's very positive that DFID, in particular, had a really positive effect on the Democratic Republic of Congo. But we also can think a little bit here about how sometimes our support is conditional. Aid conditionality isn't always something that is beneficial to people on the ground, but we have to think also about how we support the neighbouring countries as well. And the sanctions that were imposed on Rwanda by the UK and US governments in 2012 were very effective at halting support for the M23 militia group by the Rwandan government. And what we've seen since 2021 is the re-emergence of M23, and so far there doesn't seem to have been quite that effort to put the brakes on the Rwandan support for M23 in the DRC. I'm also conscious that this is an area where we should think about joined-up government. It's not only about international development, for which the Minister is responsible, but joined-up government. And in April this year, we had the government defending its so-called Rwanda plan, and this was a transfer of £380 million to Rwanda for the so-called Economic Transformation and Integration Fund. There seemed to be no thought there at all for what effect the Rwandan government was having in the DRC with the alleged sponsorship of M23. Indeed, actually, if you wanted some evidence for that, then you need only watch BBC Question Time, where the then Minister of State at the Home Office revealed that he wasn't even aware of whether Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo were different countries. So very plainly, some of the thinking in the Home Office was not joined up with some of the thinking in the FCDO or in relation to international development. Finally, it's very positive to see that the new government has been thinking already about peace in the DRC, and I read that Lord Collins, the new Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Africa, went to Angola in August, and this followed shortly after the signing of an agreement, a ceasefire agreement between Rwanda and the DRC as part of the Rwanda process. So some positive steps that we've seen in terms of UK policy or UK support in recent months. And so now that I see my time is up, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hook. And can I add my congratulations to the Right Honourable Member for Islington North for securing this debate. It is so important that this Parliament shines a light on situations like this and the one that I debated yesterday in Sudan. And it is such an important issue, and I was honoured to listen to the speeches of colleagues, the member for Edmonton and Winchmore Hill, the member for Strangford, who spoke with such passion, the member for Honiton and Sidmouth, who certainly was able to articulate why this is so important an issue. And I had the privilege myself, Dr. Hook, when I was Minister for Africa in Theresa May's government, of going to the Democratic Republic of Congo several times, including my first visit going to Kalemi, right down on Lake Tanganyika, to see how UK aid was helping to keep children who had fled into terrible situations in education, and how important it is that we keep that focus on making sure that children are educated. In Congo, where I saw that UK Aid had helped build a health clinic for newborns. And then, of course, towards the end, on a later visit, I went through Goma and to Butembo during the Ebola outbreak to see how UK Aid was helping with the vaccination of so many people there, and that the city of Goma has actually its fresh water system provided by UK Aid over the years. So we have, over many decades, recognised how important it is that we try and help those fleeing the terrible conflict, which I don't need to repeat is very, very worrying in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because we can see how many of the population as a result are facing food shortages, and how many millions of people are displaced by this conflict. And it is very disheartening to hear that in recent months the conflict has intensified, displacement has intensified, and it's particularly distressing to hear these further reports of sexual violence. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo has had a troubled history, as we heard from the Right Honourable Gentleman. It has suffered terribly, and it is nevertheless an incredibly important place, not just for the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but for the whole planet, because it is one of the great carbon sinks of this planet, the forests, the virgin forests, the importance of the natural resources, which we all want to see get legally into the supply chains, and that people who mine them are fairly rewarded for that work. And it's concerning that the withdrawal of MONUSCO at the request of the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo appears to be throwing up these unexpected challenges, including potentially exacerbating this terrible humanitarian situation. The work of peacekeeping troops remains very important. Attacks against them and against the international non-government organisations which operate there have really reached triple figures almost since the start of the year. They are despicable. I'm sure they will be roundly condemned by all colleagues here. And I hope the new government will continue to support British NGOs in their important work. Of course, I want to single out in particular the work of Tear Fund, who lost 2 members of their team in July in an attack on a convoy arriving in Butembo from Lubero. And so can we take a moment to remember those individuals who are so brave, their families, and all those who risk their lives delivering this all-important aid. As the withdrawal of MONUSCO continues, I urge the new UK government to continue encouraging the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to step up its protection responsibilities for civilians against armed rebels, and its engagement with that all-important political process in Luanda. And the others, of course. The humanitarian truce and ceasefire from earlier this summer appears to have somewhat lowered tensions, and any progress is to be applauded. However, we are concerned at the suggestion that supply routes, including those for food, continue to be disrupted. The UN Security Council resolution in August, which unanimously agreed to increase cooperation between MONUSCO and the Southern African Development Community Mission, who will be tasked with much of the work of security and stabilisation of the country, is warmly welcomed. I also want to briefly touch on the recent Mpox outbreak. It's, of course, intimately linked to the conflict across the country. I can put on the record that the Shadow Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, recently spoke to Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, and he emphasised the importance of an international response to this virus so that we can contain it. And during the time that my party was in government, we had pledged $126 million of funding for a 3-year humanitarian project. I'd be interested in hearing what the new government is planning to do in that area. And I want to end my comments by asking about British international investment. They have been one of the organisations that's been able to go and make really good investments into the Democratic Republic of Congo, creating jobs. I appreciate that things may have changed since 2018. I'd be interested in an update on that. And end my comments by again urging support by the new government here in the UK of the political solutions in Luanda and Nairobi that are really the only long-term solutions to advancing peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And for the government, Minister Annalise Cox.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Huck, and it's a real pleasure to take part in this important debate with you in the chair. And of course, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Islington North for securing what has been a very important debate, I think a very rich debate actually, and I want to thank everybody who's taken part in it. This is, of course, a debate that has global significance, as many have commented on, but it also is a debate which has very direct significance for those living in our country whose family and friends have been impacted by the very concerning situation that has been detailed. And I know that's particularly the case for my friend for Edmonton and also indeed for the Right Honourable Member for Islington North as well. And of course, the security situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo is dire, and it is deserving of our attention. And I think my Right Honourable, the Right Honourable Member for Islington North was absolutely right to point out the fact that it has received insufficient global attention. It's very rare that one sees coverage of this issue, unfortunately, in the UK media. And when we look at the figures, it is surprising, frankly, that we find that. Of course, many speakers have detailed those. If we look in summary, we can see that over 7 million people have been displaced and over 23 million people are in need. And ultimately, DRC is facing one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. The new government is determined to ensure that the UK will play its part here. And I'm going to talk about how we're determined to do that in the remainder of my remarks. And of course, that is against the basis of previous government activity. I do want to acknowledge that. Obviously, the Shadow Minister rightly referred to this. And overall, we see the UK contributing a £114 million humanitarian programme for Eastern DRC that is delivering life-saving emergency assistance right now to people in need. And it's critical also in the context of our commitment to building lasting partnerships with African countries that we continue with that engagement with the issues that we've been talking about in this debate. And there were some specific decisions, specific questions asked about our ODA contribution and the continuation of that, also around the role of BII, and that has been significant, and some really exciting developments actually that show some of that potential that was referred to. Of course, I'm sure members will understand that those decisions are kept under review. I very much heard members' representations on this, but of course we do have a spending review coming up, as I'm sure members will understand. On the specific issues that were raised, first of all, around conflict prevention, I can underline that is very much one of our top priorities as a new government. That includes, of course, fostering peace and supporting mediation efforts in DRC and the wider Great Lakes region. And I was grateful to hear about the visits that have been undertaken by the Shadow Minister when she was in her previous role to DRC. She's clearly passionate about these issues. The new government has been determined to engage as much as possible. And I was grateful to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for acknowledging the fact that Lord Collins has been in DRC. He's also been to Angola, and he is currently in Rwanda as well. So I hope that demonstrates the significance of commitment. While in Luanda, Lord Collins met with President João Lourenço to discuss Angola's pivotal role in mediating peace in DRC. He did congratulate the President on his recent successful efforts to negotiate a ceasefire. Those have been referred to by other members. But across the region, Lord Collins has encouraged all parties to not only fulfil their obligations under that ceasefire agreement, but to respect it in spirit, not just in letter, and to continue to seek to find ways to build on this progress to bring lasting peace. And he's conveyed that message right across those countries that he has been present in. There is that regional engagement that also is asked about, of course, by my honourable friend from Edmonton. And the honourable member for Strangford, I thank him for his kind words. He talked about the need for broader regional engagement as well. Of course, he is right about a whole range of countries. He mentioned South Africa. There are other nations, of course, in Africa deeply concerned about this situation, the instability that is then having that regional impact more broadly. But of course the African Union as well, and I know that Lord Collins is keen to make sure that we are using those relationships to, as I said, try and bring the lasting peace that is the right of the people of the DRC. However, I would say that while recent steps have been encouraging, we cannot lose sight of the conflict's history. It has, as has been mentioned, persisted for almost 30 years, but the escalations of violence that we've seen over the last 2 years have been particularly concerning. The UK government strongly condemns the actions of all armed groups, including the UN-sanctioned M23 and the FDLR, and I reiterate the UK's support for the regionally led Nairobi peace process and the Luanda peace process as well. Peacekeeping was also, of course, referred to. It is a crucial part of international efforts to promote peace in eastern DRC, and MONUSCO does play a vital role in protecting civilians. So that members are aware, the UK has deployed 3 military staff officers to support MONUSCO's planning and performance and contributed £48 million to its budget in the last financial year under the previous government. However, MONUSCO is operating currently in very challenging circumstances. The Shadow Minister referred to attacks on peacekeepers and UN property. She described them as despicable. We would certainly share that assessment. They're unacceptable. When it was asked about what actions are being taken, the UK is continuing to push for accountability, responsibility for those who have conducted these despicable acts. And we do recognise also the importance of regionally led peacekeeping initiatives. As such, last month the UK supported the adoption, as was mentioned, of a UN Security Council resolution that mandated limited targeted support from MONUSCO to the Southern African Development Community's mission in DRC. We will continue to work closely with MONUSCO and UN Security Council member states to alleviate the conflict and its appalling humanitarian consequences. And when it comes specifically to the issue of withdrawal, we will continue to work closely with the DRC government on this towards a condition-based withdrawal that ensures a smooth transition and, above all, the protection of civilians. But I want to be absolutely clear that ultimately it's a political response, of course, not a military one, that's going to deliver that peace that is so desperately needed. And as I said, Lord Collins has been urging all sides to engage, particularly with the Luanda process, and deliver on their commitments made already during that process. The impacts of the conflict on civilians are widespread and they are devastating. The Shadow Minister talked about the impact on humanitarian workers. It indeed has been dreadful, including some particularly concerning recent instances as well. And our solidarity goes to and sympathy goes to the family of those affected. And of course, in the East, conditions there increase the risk of sexual violence, malnutrition and disease. And DRC has been hit by multiple life-threatening outbreaks in recent years. Ebola, of course, was mentioned, but also cholera and measles as well. And now, of course, it's grappling, as has been mentioned, with deeply concerning outbreaks of Mpox across the country, particularly in the East, where, of course, the new strain emerged and where displaced people, particularly children and women and men, are living in appalling conditions. It's vital the international community works together in this context to control the spread of the virus and save lives. And that's why, while he was in DRC, Lord Collins announced more than £3 million in funding to UNICEF to tackle the ongoing Mpox and cholera outbreak as well. I can also assure that the new government has met with Dr Tedros. I have myself personally as Minister for Development, as has the Foreign Secretary as well, and Lord Collins is going to be meeting him soon, including to talk about these issues. Now, the issue of those living in IDP camps was also mentioned. They've been subject to direct consequences of the conflict. The member for Honiton and Sidmouth referred rightly to the prevalence of sexual violence, which is very concerning for those in IDP camps. But of course, we've also seen the bombing of IDP camps, disturbingly, in May this year. I condemn that in the strongest terms. The UK has repeatedly raised the inviolability of camps in multilateral fora and has consistently called for all parties to respect international humanitarian law, including by positioning heavy artillery away from camps. I wish to pay tribute to the invaluable efforts, again, of humanitarian workers in this context, but I also want to briefly touch on their important role in delivering the food security that's so desperately needed, that was rightly referred to by the member for Strangford in his powerful and compassionate speech. I want to inform members that the UK is signing a new agreement with the World Food Programme, committing a further £7 million to tackle food insecurity in DRC, because we're aware of that need. Now, the subject of women and girls was rightly referred to many times. DRC is a priority country here because women and girls there face some of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. The Right Honourable member for Islington North stated he met with some of the survivors. That vivid picture he painted was one that others referred to, one that I will remember. As an important Global South partner on this agenda, the UK and DRC have collaborated on action to tackle conflict-related sexual violence. That's included as members of the International Alliance on PSVI and partners under the Platform for Action promoting the rights and well-being of children born of conflict-related sexual violence, particularly difficult for those children who've been born, for example, out of conflict-related rape. And also, we're determined to boost the resilience of civil society partners, raised by many others as well. That includes ensuring that we're providing support to NGOs who are supporting survivors of sexual violence, and particularly the Trial International organisation, which we are supporting. Oh, right, OK. I will write to members about the other issues that they have raised. I'm very sorry if we ran out of time. Sorry, I think the vote in the middle has disturbed this. But I will write to members about the other issues that they have mentioned. I'm grateful to everyone for their participation in this debate. Thank you.
Order, order. Sitting adjourned until tomorrow. Yeah. Do you know?
The proceeding has ended.